My name is Jeffrey M. Cohen. I'm running for state representative for the 36th Legislative District.
And could you tell me a little bit about your district?
Absolutely. So my district basically comprises the area from Belltown all the way up to Carkey Park. So we're talking Ballard, we're talking Inner Bay, we're talking Magnolia, we're talking Queen Anne, part of SLU, part of Greenwood. So definitely a very dynamic area in terms of voters. About 110,000 registered voters, so roughly 55,000 to 60,000 households. Definitely a very active voter participation district. Generally speaking, in terms of the 49 districts across the state, we have one of the highest voter turnouts. And we're talking in non-presidential year primaries, presidential year primaries, non-presidential year generals, and presidential year generals. So definitely a very active voter participation and active voters in our district.
And what made you decide to run for public office?
Well, thanks for asking. So it's something I've wanted to do for a very long time. And a lot of I've been a volunteer locally with gay and lesbian organizations and a lot of homeless organizations and things of that nature. And really what made it happen for me, in my industry was hit pretty early on in the COVID epidemic. I'm in travel tourism, specifically the cruise industry. So we got hit basically in February when our ships were denied entry into some of the Asian countries, right? So it was pretty much crunch time in our industry at that point. We were putting out a lot of fires, dealing with a lot there. And then as the pandemic spread to the States, I really saw so many of the social issues that I'm passionate about. So, advocacy for our seniors, our struggling small businesses. I mean, it's really tough to open a small business, a restaurant, a local shop, things like that in normal times, let alone during this time. So I really saw so many of the issues that I'm passionate about really exacerbated by this situation and the epidemic. And I really felt, I wanted to be a champion for the issues and the causes that I'm passionate about. So that's, pretty much, why I got in. I mean, definitely the impacts of COVID really can't be understated. I mean, it has affected our families, our businesses. And when I talk to everyday voters, whether, via phone banking or the people that I do meet when we're, masked up on the street, there's just a lot of fear and uncertainty about what comes next. I mean, we're in phase two, we're paused in phase two, right? As cases are on the rise. And I think any of us thought that was going to happen, right? As we kind of relaxed the requirements, and people maybe didn't do what they were supposed to in terms of masking up or gathering in large groups. It definitely has spread. So I think there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about where we're going now. Are we going to revert in phases? Are things going to start closing again? And, with unemployment as it is, in our state, somewhere hovering 11, 12%, it's really going to be a long road back, in terms of our economy. So pretty much those are the reasons. I mean, I really have experienced firsthand the effects of the pandemic. I've been employed in the cruise industry for 13 years, and about a month and a half into running for office, I got laid off myself. And a lot of our company laid off about half of our 3 offices in the States. And a lot of my supporters and the people I talk to, they've experienced that as well. So it's not like just talking the talk. I mean, I'm right there with everyone that's experiencing firsthand what they're going through. So, I really want to see our state, our community, our workforce, get back on its feet and back to work in however that looks, going forward in terms of the new reality that we're faced.
And what kind of personal experiences would we be bringing to this new job?
Well, so I've been in the private sector my entire career. So in terms of what I did for the cruise line, so my most recent employment, I would negotiate contracts. So I was in port operations, so deal with vendors and a lot of different stakeholders all across the world, definitely with different competing interests and trying to find common ground. So I really do feel like that mirrors what you have to do in a legislative body, especially in Olympia. I'm definitely an outsider. I'm definitely an underdog. I have no illusions about that. The other two folks in my race definitely have more legislative experience. One being essentially, former legislative aide, and also with some lobbying efforts in Olympia, and the other lady being, assistant state attorney. So, definitely they're a lot more connected with that whole sphere. I'm more an outsider, but I definitely see that as more of an asset than a hindrance, in that most people in my district work in the private sector and, experience a lot of those real challenges. And, I think my experience in working with a very sizable budget in my department and for the area that I oversaw, that definitely feeds into what we're going to be dealing with in Olympia, especially come the new session next year and having to grapple with this budget shortfall that we're experiencing. So I think my experience, a lot of years in balancing budgets, for a corporation, definitely play into that.
You touched on this a little bit already, but what are some of the biggest issues facing your district that can be addressed at the state level?
So definitely support. Several things tying to the economy, but support for our struggling small businesses. I mean, obviously, a lot or everything everywhere closed right before the reopening phases, right? So now as things are reopening, a lot isn't. A lot is permanently closed out there. I mean, I follow all the local restaurants, retail stores, whatnot. I mean, Tom Douglas is not reopening a couple of his restaurants, probably more to come. A lot of local stores right in my immediate vicinity, and I'm on the edge of Belltown, basically on the edge of the district. And I see a lot have completely shuttered, and a lot of small business owners that I know. So definitely support for our struggling small businesses. I mean, there's a lot I want to grapple with in Olympia in terms of B&O tax. That's a big thing that really makes it very inequitable for small businesses to survive, and for a lot of small businesses and startups to get going, right? It's definitely a hindrance for that. And I don't think it's a very equal way to tax businesses. The smaller businesses bear the brunt of that. So that's one. And then definitely we have a very regressive tax structure. It's unlike anywhere else in the country. And that's a big thing for me, is reforming that over time. But obviously the immediate issue is grappling with this budget shortfall. I mean, 8.8 billion at the state level. Part of that plays into the current budget, about half roughly. The other half is for the next budget that we'd be doing in January. So, it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of things cut, right? And just a lot of hard choices. So that's definitely what I see as the biggest short-term thing that we have to tackle for the district. I mean, it's changed the whole conversation, right? COVID. I mean, all the things we talked about, we still talk about it too, but it's in a different way. So now you see the whole struggle with, schools reopening, right? That's the state level, for funding for public schools. Well, that's a whole back and forth. Well, what's that going to look like come the fall? How's that going to look for teachers and the, teachers union and the students and the parents, right? Parents overnight had to all of a sudden become, school teachers. So there's so much there and so much really to unpack. And I definitely see that's what is going to be the biggest challenge facing the district and the larger community, the county, and the state.
You mentioned the B&O tax. Would you mind
Yes.
explaining to our listeners what that is and what are some of the problems that are associated with it?
Absolutely. So the business and occupational tax. So how that structure works for businesses is it's a tax on gross revenue and not on net. So that's before any payrolls paid, any overhead in terms of any rent, anything like that for businesses. So even though it's kind of a low amount or a small percentage, it before a business even makes any money, they have to pay the government. So they could be, after their all the other fees come out, they pay their employees, they pay their rent, whatnot. They could be in the red, yet they already paid the state already got its chunk. And I just really feel like that is not a very fair way to tax our businesses. And definitely, I feel like it disproportionately adversely affects our smaller businesses. You know, it's not easy to start a new business, a new restaurant, anything like that. It's really a big leap of faith. And it kind of puts a business at a deficit from the start. And I feel like a better way would be a business income tax. You know, that's a lot more fair in terms of taxing smaller business and larger businesses, you know, going forward. It's definitely more realistic in terms of whether a business is profitable or not. So I definitely feel like the B&O tax, either it has to be reduced or eliminated entirely. And that's my feeling on that.
Our state has a very regressive tax structure in general.
Completely. I mean, we rely so much on sales tax and a hodgepodge of a lot of different taxes like that, right? And for being such a progressive part of the country, Oregon, Washington, for Northern California, for being such a progressive part with our politics, it's really interesting how we have such a regressive tax structure, and it's really not like a lot of other places around the country. I mean, I've looked into it, and no other place has it quite like this. You know, we rely on sales tax, various excise taxes to make up our revenue, right? And I really feel like, there's a reason why most states have an income tax, and it just makes sense. And that's what I'm supportive of. So
you'd be pushing for a state income tax?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, I would.
And what are some of your if you're elected, what would be some of your other legislative priorities?
So some of my other legislative priorities, I'm a gay man, right? So definitely LGBTQ rights and freedoms are a big part of what I stand for personally. Recently, at the Supreme Court level, we saw that LGBT rights are protected, and we're talking transgender rights, whatnot, everything under the Civil Rights Act, right, in terms of employment. And that's a great move forward, just the same as, when we had gay marriage, that was a great move forward. But the work definitely is far from over. And some things where we still grapple with some of the adoption laws, housing discrimination, that's a big thing. And, I'm not just talking about that, against the LGBT plus community. I mean, obviously, Black Lives Matter is an ongoing civil rights fight as well. And, discrimination of any sort, I'm into equity, right? Whether it's, through, fiscal equity, like I talked about with the tax structure, and definitely in terms of, social services and, equal rights as well. And so that's a big thing. I mean, a lot of discrimination, back to LGBTQ, but so in terms of housing, in terms of, every aspect of life. So that's a big thing. Definitely the homeless situation. I mean, as it relates to LGBTQ plus, there's a lot of youth homeless, and definitely a lot of these areas are handled at the city level and the county level, but I really feel like the state could do a lot more as well.
And on your website, you mentioned ranked choice voting.
Yes, ranked choice voting. Yes. Yeah.
Would you mind explaining to listeners what ranked choice voting is? I think we've talked about it previously on
did you?
an old episode, but maybe refresh the listeners.
No, absolutely. So it definitely comes more into play when you have 3 or more candidates for a particular office, right? I mean, 2, not so much. So it gives a lot more, again, with equity, a lot more, it prevents more disenfranchisement, of voting. So let's take a look at the governor's ballot this year. Okay, so there's a ton of people, right? So I want to say somewhere upwards 12, 15 folks on that list. So instead of specifically picking one person, so, okay, for example, I want Jay Inslee for this role. He's done a great job, whatnot. So instead of doing that, you rank your choices, right? So maybe Jay Inslee's 1, And then, oh gosh, I can't even think all the people that are in there. But Good Space Guy maybe is too.
Yes.
And the list. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, Phil Ford. There's a lot of people. So you go down the list, and if every voter does that, then you get like a first tier, a second tier. You get a lot more informed decision on terms of what a voter wants because they have ranked their choices as opposed to one or nothing, right? So you don't know how that voter feels about everyone else other than the person they voted for, right? So definitely when it comes to a runoff situation, and I mean, in our state, we have a top two, getting past the primary. In my race, there's three of us, so two of us will advance. It definitely makes a more informed decision on who that second person, for example, would be in terms of these rankings. So you'll get a ton of people with one and lots of people with two, and then you can really see an informed decision, I mean, statistically, on who should be the second choice, so to speak, going into a runoff. So I just think it the ballot box generally is an all or nothing, and that gives it a lot more information on what the voter wanted. I hope that I explained that
Yeah.
pretty well.
Yeah. No, that's great. So, 2020 has a lot of things going on right now, but one of
Yeah.
the biggest issues happening right now is the issues about police violence. What do you
Yes,
think can be
absolutely.
done at the state level to help fix this issue?
No, that's a really, really, really great question. So, just to talk a little bit about ongoing civil rights and Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, it's definitely, nothing new. I mean, definitely, Dr. King advocated, many before him, civil rights for African Americans. And I, just the same as gay marriage is legal, and that didn't end the whole fight for gay marriage just because, I mean, it was monumentous. We elected a Black president. The fight for civil rights isn't over. And, what happened to George Floyd and countless other African Americans while in police custody and during interactions with police is just a horrible stain on our country. And, we're really hitting, an inflection point and a reckoning at this moment, at every level of society. And we're just grappling with this. And personally, as a white male, I mean, I don't know firsthand what it's like, to walk in African American shoes. I don't know what it's like to have interactions with police and fear for my life, and I just don't know that experience because that isn't something I've experienced firsthand. But what I can do as an advocate and as a supporter of the movement is, listen to our communities of color, fight and protest for what's right. During the protests locally, I joined in on those, and I was very proud to, because you have to be on the right side of history. And in terms of what can be done at the state level, I mean, obviously, right now, the big thing at the city level with the city council is defunding police. I definitely agree with that plan in terms of, instead of throwing all this money into what looks like the solution to the problem, meaning this robust police force that's armed and whatnot, you put that back into the communities that need it. And we're talking about jobs programs and community centers, and really putting it in the areas that historically have been underserved and have been, according to those residents, over policed for all the wrong reasons. And I really feel like at the state level, this can be something that we can direct local governments to do. I mean, it just really makes sense that, there becomes so much inequity sometimes, even in bus routes and transportation and just so many things that serve these communities. And it's just, you end up having a different experience based on where you live, and it just shouldn't be like that. So I really feel like the money can be better served, and I fully support the defund movement. I think a lot of people don't really understand what that means. They hear this catch-all term and they feel like, oh, they're gonna take, we're not gonna, it's gonna be lawless, we're not gonna have any police. And that's not what, the name may be a little misleading, but it just means you cut police department budgets to reallocate those resources to where it's needed more. And it makes a lot of sense. I really feel like at the state level, we could really help navigate that in the right direction and support it.
Could you tell me a little bit about your experience campaigning during this very strange time of a
Oh my
pandemic?
gosh. Yeah, thanks for the question, Jason. I really, really appreciate that. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, I have no point of reference. It's my first campaign for public office. I've worked on other campaigns, as a volunteer over the years, and definitely there was, a lot of door knocking and things like that, which we don't do. But as a candidate and running my campaign, it definitely has been, a unique experience. A lot of calls like we're doing right now, a lot of Zoom calls. Um, they happen constantly. A lot of online fundraisers, a lot of calling folks. It's definitely interesting. Really was looking out, to being out on the trail and meeting, groups of people and shaking hands and kissing the babies and all that. It just isn't in the cards this year. I mean, it just isn't, as much as you try. I mean, I have my mask on. I'll talk to people from a distance. People have different comfort levels, and that's okay. I mean, it definitely, the pandemic really has worried a lot of people, and people are worried about their own health and well-being and that of their families, and I completely get it. So anything I can do, to hunker down and participate, absolutely. But it definitely, I won't mix words or lie. It's been hard. It's hard raising money in this environment. You try your best, but the point of having in-person fundraisers and talking to groups of people and donors, that really does get people, fired up and inspired, and they tend to be generous and contribute, for a cause, and that's fantastic. But I just imagine a lot of charities and a lot of places are really experiencing the same type of thing across the board. So it's not just myself or other people running in Washington State. It's just completely across the board. And I mean, I launched in May. We started laying the groundwork in March and April. So I've only raised money in this environment. So it's not like I even started early in the year before it hit. But you just adapt, and I've had great conversations with voters on the phone and via Zoom and in the rallies I've held online, and generally if you call people, you can reach them because they're home, so that's a plus side. So my thing is I always try to find the positive thing to what we're going through, and it's definitely been an experience. It's been a fantastic experience so far, and I'm excited to get past the primary and have 3 more months to the general, so and just kind of see what the future holds.
And do you have any final thoughts for the listeners?
Wow. Well, I do. I mean, we've all gone through, really, 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 really interesting time this year. I mean, I don't think any of us, are going to forget this in our lifetime. I mean, in my entire life, I mean, I've never, experienced anything like this. And, I know the last several months haven't been easy for anyone. And, who would have figured when we're ringing in the new year? And actually, my sister said it because we attended a New Year's party and there was no fireworks this year, remember, because of the weather. So she says now, she says, look, it was an omen. It was supposed, but who would have figured we've been in the middle of a pandemic, lockdown, quarantine, and, dealing with a lot of the same conversations we dealt with, again and again, with civil rights, So I really do feel like, the impacts of COVID and the economy, everything really, can't be understated. And our communities really, crying out for help and for change, and, really, really apprehensive of what comes next. But I really do feel like there will be a turning point. I mean, cases are on the rise with the pandemic, but I definitely feel like, at some point things will start leveling off. And, I'm really, really, interested in seeing that happen. But, in the meantime, COVID really has disproportionately impacted our communities of color, our small businesses, and a lot of our frontline and service industry employees. People are really entering a very uncertain future. Even some states like California, where they had opened, now they've gone back, right? So a lot of people are really worried about, if they're going to have a job after this. And, I definitely feel like the road to recovery is going to be tough. And so many times it will seem like, like two steps forward, one back. But as I talk to the voters in my district, I really want to be in this fight, and I'm up for the challenge. And I really feel like there's going to be a lot of hard choices in Olympia in terms of budget. But I really want to be a champion for our district. And I really hope when people receive ballots this coming Friday and in the 16 days they have to vote, that they vote for me going forward. So I really ask to earn everyone's vote for this position, because I really feel like we're definitely at a unique part or a unique point in our history. And, I want to be part of the solution for what comes next as we come out of this.
And if people want to learn more about you and your campaign, where should they go?
So on my website, vote jeffreymcohen.com. So it has my initiatives, about me, things like that. And also I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the usual social media channels. So I hope everyone checks it out.
I'll make sure to have those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time and coming on the show.
Jason, thank you so much for reaching out and for having me. It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Talk to Seattle, and I've been your host, Jason Rigdon. If you liked this episode, would you please share it on social media? Most podcast clients have a little share button. Click that and tell people why they should listen. If you want to support Talk to Seattle, would you please give the show a rating and review on iTunes? It really helps new people discover the show, and it makes me happy. Follow Talk to Seattle on Twitter at Talk to Seattle, and email any questions, comments, or suggestions to jasonrigdon@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening.